There's an abundance of content regarding specific photo editing tips, tricks, and techniques that is very easy to overlook how important the basics are for setting up your photos to use those specific tips and techniques. In this video, I will be taking you through my personal editing workflow that I use on every single photo and show you some of the ways that I take my photos from this to this. Stay tuned. So welcome back everybody, it's great to see you all again. Let's jump right into Lightroom and get to editing. So if we take a look at this image, this is going to be the one that we're editing today. This is an image from my recent trip to Salt Creek Falls in Oregon. Of course, the image on the left is the raw file and the image on the right has some edits applied to it. So if we pull up the raw file here, you're gonna notice that this image is very underexposed. And I actually did this on purpose. When shooting, I usually like to underexpose my images just a little bit so I preserve some of the highlights and can bring back the shadows in post. So let's come up to the development tab here and select the lighting section. The first thing we're going to want to do is get the exposure correctly. So let's come up to the exposure slider. And if you're a little confused on where to start as far as how to get your exposure correct, you can always just hold down the shift key and Lightroom will actually give you the option to have it do it for you. And on this photo, I actually did a pretty decent job. Although in my experience, it does tend to overexpose images a little bit, but I am going to keep it how it is for this photo. We are going to be skipping the contrast slider for now, come down to highlights. I'm gonna bring those down just a little bit. I'll bring up the shadows quite a bit. Bring up the whites. I want the water and the haze in the background to just glow a little bit to add a little bit of attraction to that area. And then we'll bring the blacks down as well. And already the photo is looking so much better. If we just look at the before and the after, it's already looking way better than what we started off as. Here's the before and the after, and the before and the after. And all we've done so far is just get the exposure correct. So for now, we're gonna skip that point curve. I wanna make sure the white balance is where it needs to be. So let's go down to the color section and we're going to look at the temperature first. Lightroom does tend to do a pretty decent job for the auto white balance, and I also use auto white balance as the setting on my camera most of the time as well. So what I'm going to do here, although Lightroom did a pretty decent job, I'm just going to bring the temperature up just a little bit to kind of exaggerate those greens and yellows we have in this photo. Now, I don't tend to mess with the tint all too often. This is if your photo is very green or very pink. You can move it either to the left to get more of those pinks out of the way or move it to the right to get the greens out of the way. Actually, there's a bit of a green tinge to this, so I may move it to the right just a little bit. Next, we're going to be taking a look at the vibrance and saturation. I usually like to bring the vibrance up to about +20 and bring the saturation down. And basically what this does, if we crank the vibrance all the way up, the vibrance acts kind of as a saturation, but to each individual color by itself, whereas if we crank the saturation, it kind of brings extra color to the photo as a whole. So I like to bring out those specific colors and not necessarily every color. So I'll decrease the saturation between about 5 and 10. About -5 looks good for this photo, and I'll increase the vibrance a little bit as well. And with the white balance all finished, here's the before and after. You can see that it was just a bit green tinted, so we fixed that and just brought out the little details in the color as well with the vibrance. Next, we're going to make our way down to the effects tab, and we're going to increase the texture to about 20 and bring down the clarity to about -20. And then the dehaze to about -10. And what that will do is that it will actually add just a bit of natural atmospheric haze to the image. And essentially what texture versus clarity is about the same as vibrance versus saturation. Texture is going to bring out the smaller details and add contrast to the smaller details, whereas clarity is going to add contrast to the bigger details in the photo. And already you can see how much better this photo is looking than what we started off with. with just the basic simple edits. I'll show you the before and after. Here is before and after. Here's before and after. So next we're gonna make our way up to that point curve. I'm gonna make this extremely simple. I usually just do a simple S curve. I will raise the higher midtones, lower the lower midtones, and then take that tail end of the shadows and just raise it up a little bit to give it kind of a painted, soft look. This just takes away a little bit of that hard digital look. So here's a before and after of just the point curve. As you can see, the contrast is very subtle, but it is a very important step. So again, there is the before and the after. So we're just gonna come back up. We're gonna raise the contrast a little bit. Sometimes I do lower the contrast slider, although I think for this image, I will definitely raise it up just a little bit to add a little bit more contrast to the image. So as you can see, this photo is looking so much better than what we started off, and that is just the basic edits. That is no color mixer, no color grading, no masking at all. This is just the most basic edits that I do with every single one of my photos. So turning off the entire edit now, we went from this to this, from this to this. Truly a huge difference. Now, one other simple thing that I may do is I come over here and I'll add a radial gradient. The first thing that we want people's eyes to see is this rock in the foreground, which is our subject. So we're gonna just place a radial gradient on that rock, increase the exposure, decrease the highlights, and just add a bit of clarity to accentuate that subject. And you can see what we did there. It is a very small change, but it does really make a big difference. It is very important that the first thing people see when you look at the photo is the subject itself, and it just kind of leads your eye through the photo into the background. Now, another thing that I do with pretty much every one of my photos is add a vignette. So what you can do is come over to the effects panel and just move down the slider to create that vignette. But another way I like to do it is to go into your masks and grab that linear gradient and just drag it from the bottom up to about where the subject is and just decrease that exposure. So it takes your eye away from that corner that we don't want you to see. We want you to see that subject right away. And the thing that people's eyes are going to gravitate towards is going to be the brightest part of your image. So if you have the light in the back of your image, that's already a win-win, because people's eyes are going to start at the front of your image and just automatically make its way to the back of the image. So what we can do is that we can come back here, and there's already some sunlight in the back of this photo, but what I like to do is create a radial gradient, a fairly large radial gradient in the back where the sun would be, and then we just come over and we increase the exposure, decrease the dehaze, decrease the clarity just a tad bit, and then I like to warm it up with the temperature slider as well. It creates this nice glow that basically mimics the sun being there. So having the sun enhanced in the back of your image or wherever it is, it'll automatically attract the viewer's eye straight through the image all the way to the back where you'd like them to follow, so it tells a story. So now if we just look at an overall before and after of this photo with no more than just 10 minutes of editing the basics, this is the before and here is the after. Here is the before and the after. Now I would tweak this just a little bit more, maybe bring down the highlights some, affect some of the colors, maybe bring down the greenness of the greens, make it more of a fall photo rather than a bright summer spring photo. But those are all the tips and tricks that you've learned in other videos that I will be uploading as well. So if you're interested in some more tips, tricks, and techniques, check out my other videos to take your photos to the next level. Thank you all so much for watching. Make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. Share it with your friends, and I'll see you in the next one.